The night I get back, whichever. Good evening. Today we are learning Maseches Chagigah Daf Ches and Daf Tes Amud Aleph. We are on the second line of Daf Ches Amud Aleph, and we are going to quote from a brisa that we learned yesterday. The brisa had said, Amar Mar, in the name of Beis Hillel, Beis Hillel Omrim min HaMaiser. We had said that the Shalmei Chagigah are able to be paid for by Shalmei Maiser, they're able to be paid for by Maiser with animals that are from a tithe instead of animals that are really just part of my regular checking account, whatever the equivalent was of that time. So it says the Gemara, Amai, why is it that the Shalmei Chagigah would be allowed to be purchased by Maiser? After all, Davar Shebechovahu, Davar Shebechova, Eino Ella Minachulin. The halacha should be, the halacha is that we only have Maiser under certain circumstances, but when the korban that's being brought is a davar shebechova, as a shalmei chagigah is, then meiser should not be sufficient. It should be bamina chulin. So says Ula, Amar Ula, don't worry, it's betofel. It's when you're doing a mixture of sorts between chulin and meiser. How does this work out? This is subject to a machlokas in the Amoraim. 5 lines down on Ches Amud Aleph. The Gemara says, machlokas between Chagigah and Rabbi Yochanan. Chagigah Amar, what do we do when we're splitting the cost? Toflin behema lebehema. You can switch from one animal to the next. The first animal is going to be chulin because that's the primary ikr. That's the primary mitzvah. And that fulfills the dictum that we learned above, that kol davar shebechova eino b'ala min chulin. The first animal is going to be chulin. But then toflin, we can switch it up to the other animals. They can all be made out of meiser. However, it's only true from one animal to the next that you can go from chulin to meiser. Ve'im toflin ma'os l'ma'os. But what you cannot do is take some of the money that really was meiser and some of the money that's really chulin and mix it to buy an animal. That you're not allowed to do. That's the sheet of Chagigah. But Rabbi Yochanan has the exact opposite shita. Amar, no, specifically toflin ma'os l'ma'os. Yes, you can combine money to purchase something. However, ein toflin behema lebehema. You cannot do like Chagigah said, to have the first animal be appropriately for chulin, and then all the other animals are going to be from meiser. That's not right. It has to. You can't do that switching off animals. We have to purchase the korbanos from a mixture of money. And in fact, says the Gemara, Tanya Kavasi de Chagigah and Tanya Kavasi de Rabbi Yochanan. We have a brisa that supports each of these shitas. Tanya Kavasi de Rabbi Yochanan, 10 lines down on Ches Amud Aleph. What's the brisa that supports Rabbi Yochanan? Rabbi Yochanan was of the opinion that we use money that is mixed. Some money is going to be from chulin and some from meiser. What's the brisa? The pasuk says misas. So let's look at the whole pasuk. The pasuk says in full, "V'asisa chag shavuos laHashem Elokecha misas nidvas yadecha asher titen kasher yivarechecha Hashem Elokecha." So what does it mean that you should make shavuos for Hashem your God? Misas nidvas yadecha. What does misas mean? Melamed, says the Gemara, a third of the way down on Ches Amud Aleph. Melamed she'adam mevi chovaso min chulin, that one is obligated to bring their korban from chulin. Hard to extract that from the words. We'll see later how the word misas actually has anything to do with this, but we'll get there soon. Not yet. So that's what the Gemara says in the name of Rav Yochanan, and a brisa that supports Rav Yochanan, that chovasa min chulin. U'minayin sheim ratza la'arev me'arev. And how do you know that if you want to mix monies, you are allowed to mix monies? So it says the Gemara, because Amar Talmud Lomar, kasher yivarechecha Hashem Elokecha. In any way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has blessed you, that's what you are allowed to spend on your korbanos. Be it animals, be it money, you should be allowed to spend even money. So really what Rabbi Yochanan does is he's saying, I have this brisa. Of course, Rabbi Yochanan was not the one who said this. It was posthumously. A brisa was quoted to support him. Seemingly that's the case. And the brisa indicates that kasher baruch Hashem Elokecha, the same way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has blessed you with parnasa, therefore you can use money, half chulin, half meiser, in order to pay for animals. However, Tanya Kavasi de Chagigah, there's still a shita out there like Chagigah. The first shita that we had quoted on 5 lines down, which was that we are allowed to do the first animal as chulin and subsequent animals from meiser, says the Gemara from the same exact pasuk, from the word misas, from that same pasuk. And what do we learn from there? The same primary drasha that melamed she'adam mevi chovasa min chulin, that one is obligated primarily to fulfill their obligation with money from chulin, with animals from chulin. Beis Shammai omrim. According to Beis Shammai, what does he say? Yom Rishon min chulin, day 1 has to be chulin, mikan va'elech min meiser. What does Beis Hillel say? And this we will then now see that it supports the shita of Chagigah at the top of the page. Beis Hillel omrim achila rishona min chulin. The achila, meaning the animal, not money. The achila, the animal, has to be from chulin, mikan va'elech min meiser. And then, although not relevant to our sugya, because we've already proven the shita of Chizkiah, let's finish off the brisa halfway down a little bit more. And on the rest of the days of Passover, Adam Yosei de Chavaso b'Maiser behema. Then you're allowed to use Maiser. Says the Gemara, just fundamentally to look back at this machlokas that we're having, it seems to be that everyone agrees, whether you're Chizkiah, whether you're Rabbi Yochanan, both of the brisas, everyone seems to agree that you're not allowed to bring that primary korban on day one from Maiser. Who cares? What is the difference if you pay for it in Maiser or not? So the Gemara says it's not some type of psychology that like, you have to use your own money, it shouldn't be Maiser. It's not like that. So it says the Gemara, B'Yom Tov my time alone. Why are we so strict that on Yom Tov we're not even allowed to use Maiser to pay for the korban? The Gemara says, 12 lines from the bottom, because Amar Rav Ashi, Dilma Asili Isura B'Yom Tov, because a person might be allowed to use Maiser, he might have forgotten to select a Maiser animal before Yom Tov. And remember how it works, as the Gemara is now going to tell us, that when you are establishing Maiser, your animals have to go out of a pen through a little bottleneck, one animal at a time. The 10th animal gets marked with red paint of some kind. Says the Gemara, skarta. You're not allowed to do the Maiser process of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Oh, the 10th animal put a mark on it. That's usher. You're not allowed to sauve. You're not allowed to dye the animal any colors. So because we were concerned that maybe a person would, in haste, they would start the process of Maiser and use red paint on an animal, which is Aser. Therefore, on Yom Tov, you have to pay from Chulin. That animal had to be bought from Chulin, because if you were allowed to use Maiser, then maybe you would have selected a Maiser animal on Yom Tov and used that for the Korban. Therefore, you're not allowed to do it. Referencing a question that I foreshadowed earlier, which is how does the word misas reference money in the first place? Says the Gemara, "My mashma the misas lishna dechun." How do we know that this is referring to money, to finances? Because the pasuk says, he says that he put a tax on the land. And where do you get tax from? Your income. You get tax from your income. So therefore, we know that the word misas is mas, is tax, is chulin, and that is how we got the drasha from the pasuk that reads, misas nidvas yadecha. Misas from the chulin of nidvas yadecha, the volunteer korban that you're going to bring. It has to be one that you're choosing. It has to be from an animal that's yours and from chulin. 6, 7 lines from the bottom at the 2 dots. Yisrael yotzin yedei chovasan benedarim unadavos. What is a Yisrael yotze with the meat of nedarim and nedavos? The mitzvah of simcha. The samachta bechagecha. Tanu rabbanim the samachta bechagecha. The rabos kol mine smachos lesimcha. All versions of simcha, as long as it's meat. These next few lines, if you are anti-vegan, this is your page of Talmud. So let's just learn for a moment together. Mikan amru chachamim, the rabbis therefore said that because you're able to fulfill the mitzvah of simcha with any good piece of basar, therefore Yisrael yotzin yidei chavasim b'nedarim unadavos v'maiser behema. One is allowed, a Yisrael, a non-Kohen, is allowed to fulfill his mitzvah of simcha, whether or not is nedarim unadavos and from maiser behema. V'hakohanim, and a Kohen can take your korban of achatas v'asham u'bebechor v'chaz v'shok and biyotze. Yochel maybe af be'ofos maybe a little bit of fried chicken, right? And maybe a little bit of some crackers. Says the Gemara, that's for vegans. That's not simcha. Ein simcha ela bebasar. The only way to fulfill the mitzvah of v'samachta is with meat. Chicken does not count, and that is based on the pasuk of v'samachta b'chagecha. And what's the drasha? Top of Chesed Beis. It has to be something which comes from that which is a chagigah. Yatsu elu, to exclude elu, these, namely the ophos and the menachos, the birds and the flower offerings. She'ein chagigah ba'amehem. You can never bring a korban that way. Those korbanos of chagigah cannot come from flour. And therefore, b'samachta b'chagecha is a drasha specifically on basar. It's really not about ein simcha ela b'basar. It's a drasha on the word chagigah. So it's based on the word v'samachta b'chagecha. Says the Gemara a little bit differently. No, Rav Ashi Amar mi v'samachta nafka, only from the word v'samachta, not from the word b'chagecha. So on the top line of this page, we saw it's mishecha giga b'amehem. We were darshaning the word v'chagecha. That's not what's happening here. What does Rav Ashi say? It's from the word v'samachta. Yatsu elu she'ein b'hem simcha. This really is the answer of ein simcha ela b'basar. That's really what Rav Ashi holds. The first shita doesn't hold that. The first shita of the Gemara, was it in the name of someone? Nope, it's a brisa. The first shita of the Gemara is a brisa, and it's not saying in simcha ela b'basar. It's saying it has to be bichagecha, like the chagigah, and the chagigah had to be a certain type of animal. So the Rav Ashi is saying it's more than that. It's not that it has to be any type of animal. It's ein simcha ela b'basar, and in his language, yatsu elu she'ein b'hem simcha, to exclude ophos u'menachos. birds and flower offerings which do not possess it. So then the Gemara says, that's great, but what do you do with the word bechagecha? I understand you're using v'samachta. Very good. You feel free. But what do you do with the word bechagecha? The Ravashi, hi bechagecha my abile. What does he do with the word bechagecha? Hahu, that word bechagecha, and the pasuk comes to teach us the Rav Daniel Bar Ktina. The Amar Rav Daniel Bar Ktina, Amar Rav, minayin she'ein nosim nashim b'moed. How do we know that it's usher, forbidden for one to get married during the moed, during chol hamoed? Shenemar besamachta bechagecha. Where should your simcha be placed? B'chagecha, dafka on the chag, v'lo be'ishtecha, not on a day when you get married. That's ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha. We don't allow intentionally for the coinciding of these things to take place, of the chag with moed. It's not right. Our focus of simcha is supposed to be on the chag and not on marriage, and therefore one should not get married during chol hamoed. Is the kiddushin chal? Absolutely. If a person got married at that time, does it work? Yes. If a kohen marries a gerusha, is the kiddushin chal? Yes. The kiddushin's chal. You're married, but it's not right. It's not right. Is it an isser doraisa? I don't know. It looks more like an isser asay from this type of structure, because the tzivu is v'samachta b'chagecha. You're interrupting your mitzvah of simcha by getting married. So it seems like a bittul asay or an isser asay, different types of languages in the meforshim.
If somebody's patur from simcha, you think they get married?
Who could be patur from simcha?
No.
What? No, because Avelus is interrupted by Yontif.
There's no prohibition against getting married on Rosh Chodesh.
No, but there's no formal mitzvah to have simcha on Rosh Chodesh. In fact, the poskim discuss whether or not there's even a commandment to have a suda on Rosh Chodesh, and therefore there's implications about Ya'aleh v'yavo. If you forget Ya'aleh v'yavo on a fast day, you're exempt because of what?
And the dog won't die in the town.
No, that's for Yera'eh Zechurcha. That's for showing up. This is eating meat.
Right. They stay home then.
They're staying home. These are different sivuyim. There's different mitzvahs in the Torah. My brain did the same thing that your brain did when I was learning it, but it's not. That's aliyah l'regel. This is simcha. So therefore, this person has an obligation to sit at home and be b'simcha. So how do you be b'simcha? You don't need all the people. You need a steak. So the Gemara says you're not allowed to get married. There has to be a focus on the chag. Okay, next Mishnah. 10 lines down, Chesed Beis. You have a lot of people who are eating at your home. However, you're poor. So what do you do if you have a lot of people coming for dinner, but you don't have a lot of money? So says the Gemara, you should shift the balance of your korbanos. Maybe shlamim merubim ve'olos mu'atos. You should then bring more shlamim, which is partially eaten by the consumer, by the person who brought the korban. And you should bring fewer olos because that's all consumed for Hashem. What about the reverse? Nechasim merubim, you're very wealthy, ve'ochlan mu'atim, but you have no friends, so nobody wants to come over. So then what do? Then you reverse the balance again. Maybe olos merubos, bring more to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You don't need all the food. You've got 3 people coming over. You're going to bring 5 animals. That's ridiculous. Ushlamim mu'atim, and you should have fewer of the shlamim because you don't need them. Give more to Hashem and less to you. Zeh v'zeh mu'at. What if you had no money and no friends? Al zeh ne'emar mu'akesef shtei kesef. That's where we have our minimal shiurim of obligations for olas re'iyah and shalmei chagigah of 1 unit for the olas re'iyah and 2 units of silver for the shalmei chagigah. Zeh v'zeh merubim. You have a lot of friends and you have a lot of money. Al zeh ne'emar ish kemat nas yodo kibirkas Hashem elokecha asher nasan lach. Over the top. Bring a lot of olos and bring a lot of shlamim because you can and because you should. It's the right way to spend money. There are other areas not right to spend so much money. That's this was like 10, 15 years ago when all the rabbis tried to put together this list for weddings, only 250 people. I think it flopped. I don't know. Oh, this was way before COVID. Yeah. Then a Atar Sayala opened, whatever. So that's what the Gemara says over here. The Mishnah says that if a person is very wealthy, that when it comes to the time for the Beis HaMikdash, please God, but even by Pesach, that we should be able, for those of us who are in this category, to bring a lot of olos and a lot of shlamim. Wow, what an exciting possibility. That's unbelievable. All right, third of the way down to the Gemara. The Gemara says, shlamim merubim. It says that if a person should bring a lot of shlamim. So this guy was poor. Remember, we said he was poor and had a lot of friends. Where's he getting all the cash from? Our version of poor today is different than their, like our version of poor, you have people who are homeless with smartphones. It's a whole different ballgame. I'm not judging. I'm just saying that it's a whole different league. But that's not, it's just a different ballgame. They had nothing to eat, nothing. They had no food, no money, nothing. So it says the Gemara, Mehecha Maisi. What do you mean shlamim merubim? Like, how did you arrange for that? So says the Gemara, Halesle, he's got nothing. Tofel and maybe pargadol. Weaving in what we started with today. Tofel and maybe pargadol. It's not that he brings shlamim merubim a lot of different shlamim. He just finds a way that with his minimum requirement to bring shalmei chagigah, he gets a bigger animal out of the deal, gets a few extra dollars, panhandles a little bit, and just sweetens the pot and gets a little bit of a nicer animal. Amar le Rav Sheshes says back to Rav Chizda, Hare Amru, how can you say that that's true, that you take more money and buy a bigger animal? But the Chachamim told us on the previous Amar on Ches Amud Aleph in the name of Chizkiah, Toflin behema lebehema, that you can only do it with animals, but not with money. So says the Gemara, what a strange comment. My kamarle, what was Rav Sheshes saying? If what Rav Sheshes was saying to him is hachi kamarle, that really Hare Amru Toflin behema behema avaloma oslamos. If you wanted to say that he shouldn't have spent the money this way, that we don't do toflin ma'os lamos, we don't use partial money for one thing and partial money for another, like we saw with Chizkiah, then just say that. Ain't toflin ma'os lamos. Why did you say this circuitous language of, by the way, we only do behema lebehema, and you should have said the obvious. We don't, what you're doing is usher. We don't do toflin ma'os lamos. So says the Gemara, Ella, it must therefore be that hachi amar le. It must therefore be that really Rav Sheshes was saying to Rav Chizda as follows. Halfway down on Ches Amud Beis, Hare Amru Af Toflin. Even we are Toflin behema lebehema. Not only can we be Toflin ma'os lamos, not only can we split the cost of an animal, partial meiser and partial chulin, we can do it with money. But not only that, we can also do it with behemoths. It says the Gemara, what? That wasn't Chizkiah or Rav Yochanan. The Chizkiah and Rav Yochanan had inverted shitas. The one who said you can use coins said you can't use animals. The one who said you can use animals that you can't use coins, but we don't have a leniency to use either or. Says the Gemara, that doesn't work according to anybody. And if it doesn't work according to anybody, then how does this sheet in the Gemara make sense? So therefore, the Gemara responds as follows. The Gemara says, "V'chitema." If you want to say "Amorai hu de pligi, masnaisa lo pligi," if you want to say that really Chizkiah and Rabbi Yochanan Taka do argue about this, but the brises that we learned, remember we saw two Tanya Kavases, Tanya Kavase de Chizkiah, Tanya Kavase de Rabbi Yochanan. If those brises really aren't arguing, and we can try and explain them away, you can't even say that. You can't even say that there's no machlokas in the Tanaim. There is a machlokas in the Tanaim, because what does one of the brises say? Vaktani, quote, Achila Rishona mina chulin, that your first one has to be from the chulin, which means that you're not allowed to use coins and you're only allowed to trade, you're only allowed to buy the animal, the first one from chulin, and the second one can be from meiser, which means that the shita of Chizkiah is actually a real shita. So then says the Gemara, if that's true, we have to answer the following way. Maya achila rishona. What does that brisa mean when it says achila rishona? It doesn't mean actual meat that we're talking about. Only shiur dmei achila rishona min achulin. Maybe really we are talking about the other shita. That really there is this unique shita that both ma'os lamos can be used. Two different types of ma'os and two different kinds of animals can be used. Maybe it all does work out. And when the brisa says Maya achila rishona, it's talking about something else. It's only talking about shiur dmei achila. It's talking about the financial value of and not the animal itself. We're now going to get into a discussion about Baal Tosef. We are familiar with the Psukim and Chumash that it's usher to add to the mitzvah. Some of the classical examples of this is having tzitzis where you have an extra cut, so there aren't 4 corners, but there are 6 corners, or if a garment's made with 5 corners is very difficult, but however it's made, it's possible to violate Baal Tosef. What about having a lulav and esrog that has more than hadassim and arevos? You also put in mint. You just make things up and throw it in. So that's not right either. That's Baal Tosef. What about Baal Tosef by the korbanos? So let's talk about that. 2/3 of the way down on Ches Amud Beis. Says the Gemara, Amar Ula, Amar Reish Lakish. Hifrish eser behemos lechagigaso. A person is like the Mishnah, like over here in our Mishnah, where he has a lot of money. He separates 10 animals for the Shalmei Chagigah. He's got a lot of people coming for lunch. Hikriv chamesh b'yom tov rishon, chozer mekarev chamesh b'yom tov sheni. So on the first day of Yom Tov, he brings 5 animals, and then on the last day of Yom Tov, he brings another 5 animals. So says the Gemara, that is not so simple. Rabbi Yochanan Amar kevan shepasak shuvenu makriv. Once he stops with the first 5, once he takes a break, you can no longer bring the next 5 on another day. Why? Because that is Baal Tosef. Because you brought them for a Chagigah. You separated 10 animals for a Chagigah. You brought 5 today, and now you're bringing 5 on another day. That's Baal Tosef. You can't do that. Bring them right now. Why are you bringing them on another day? That's Shita number 1. And Amar Rabbi Abba velo pligi. There is no distinctions in the Shitas here. There's nothing difficult with the Shita of Ula, who says that you can bring 5 on one day and 5 on another. And there's no machlokas between that and Rabbi Yochanan, who says that you can't bring the last 5. How can it be that there's no machlokas? Kan bistam. In one case, you did not specify what you were doing. You didn't say anything. You did 10 animals. You bought 10 animals. You sacrificed 5. And then another day, you sacrificed another 5. That looks bad because you didn't clarify what you're doing. And kan b'mefaresh, and there a person is saying, I have 10 animals. I'm going to do 5 of my korban chagigah today and 5 of them tomorrow. You're being very clear about what you're doing. That doesn't look like Baal Tosef. All of that is part of one umbrella of doing the mitzvah of shalmei chagigah. Says the Gemara, Hai stam hechidami. What was the case where a person had no intention with the 10 animals? If the reason why you stopped is because the clock ran out, the sun started to set, so you're like, I can't do anymore. So then when you bring them the next day, the only reason you're doing the korbanos the next day is because you ran out of time today. So therefore, that doesn't look like Baal Tosef. You just ran out of time. And if you're talking about a case where there is no ochel, so maybe if it's you don't have enough people to eat the food, so maybe the reason why you stopped shechting the food is because there was no one else to eat it. That also doesn't look like Baal Tosef. So it says the Gemara, Lo tzricha, what is the case where we see that without intention it looks like Baal Tosef? Lo tzricha de'ika shehus b'yom, where there really is time left in the day, the isle ochlan, and you have people who are still willing to eat, yet for whatever reason you stopped doing the shechita. Under those circumstances, when you continue the shechita the next day, that looks a lot like Baal Tosef because nobody knew what you were doing. So that case of stam is problematic. Because on that first day you didn't sacrifice all the animals when you had the opportunity and you had the motive to do so, you had time and you had people who were hungry, and then you stopped, and then the next day that doesn't make any sense. That looks like Baal Tosef, and that's the case that we're dealing with. This is very logical to assume that the distinction between Ula and Rav Huna is not a machlokes, but rather a difference between your intentions of stam versus being mefarish. How so? Because when Ravin came from Eretz Yisrael, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, he quoted the shita of Rabbi Yochanan that hifrish eser behemos lechagigaso, that if a person sets aside 10 animals for the shalmei chagigah, hikriv chamesh bayom tov rishon chozer umakriv chamesh bayom tov sheni. So here Rabbi Yochanan seems to say you can sacrifice 5 on day 1 and 5 on day 2, and it isn't a problem. But kasha nahadade, the version number 1 of Rabbi Yochanan clearly said that you're not allowed to be makriv on day 2. This version of Rabbi Yochanan says, go ahead, have a good time. Which Rabbi Yochanan is right? So says the Gemara, the same answer that we answered to clarify the difference between Ula and Rabbi Yochanan is the same answer we're going to answer between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yochanan. Elav shma mina kan bistam kan b'mefarish shma mina. That there is this distinction that when one is not clear about what their intentions are, and the scenario looks like Baal Tosef, we're going to say that it's usher. So that case scenario that the Gemara presented above was a case where you have 10 korbanos, 5 of them you did today. In theory, you could have done more. The sun wasn't going to set for a couple more hours, and you had a lot of people at your house, and you stopped. I'm just not doing any more today. Then tomorrow when you do it, it looks like Baal Tosef. However, kan b'mefaresh, here when you're explicit, you're saying, I bought 10 chagigahs. I'm going to do 5 today and 5 tomorrow. That's not Baal Tosef. You're being very clear with your intentions. Good. Says the Gemara, one more qualification, then we'll get to the next Mishnah and continue toward the bottom of the page. It is Thursday after all. Idmar Nami, we have a statement in the Amorai. Amar of Shem Barabba, Amar of Yochanan. Lo shanu, we don't have what we just learned. We don't have any limits in regards to what we just learned. Ela shelo gamar. We don't know what that means yet. He didn't complete something. Aval gamar, but if he completes, then chozer umakriv. If he completes it, then he can be makriv again. My gamar. What does it mean when it says that this only applies where he was not gamar? Ilema gamar korbanos my makriv. If he finished all of his korbanos, that can't be it. If he finished all 10, then my makriv. What's the shaila about shechting more? There you ran out already. All 10 animals are shechted. Ela shelo gamar hayom. It must be that the day hasn't finished. Under those circumstances, when the day hasn't finished, yeah, that's problematic. However, aval gamar hayom chozer umakriv. But if the reason why you stopped your korbanos is because the day was gamar, so then the next day you're allowed to. That doesn't look like Baal Tosef. The only reason you stopped was because of shkia. The Kohanim had so many animals to shech. You brought 10. You brought a lot. We ran out of time. So fine, that doesn't look like Baal Tosef, and that's the same distinction we've been seeing over and over again. To summarize this piece of the Gemara, Baal Tosef does not apply under one of two circumstances. It doesn't apply when it's obvious as to why you're using korbanos on the second day. You ran out of time, or you don't have anyone who needed to eat anymore today, but you will tomorrow. The only time it really applies is when you have a scenario where you did not clarify your intentions and you really could have finished all 10 of them and then you chose not to. That is Baal Tosef. That brings us to a new Mishnah, which is the viability of continuing tashlum and continuing korbanos if you missed your window. Says the Gemara, let's see how that works out. The Mishnah opens 4 lines down on Testament Aleph, Mishalo Chag, B'Yom Tov Harishon Shel Chag. If a person does not bring their Korban Chagigah on the first day of Chag, Chogeges Kol HaRegel B'Yom Tov HaAcharon Shel Chag. Not only can they do the Korban Chagigah as a replacement throughout the Chag, but even on the last day of the holiday, even Shmini Atzeres. And even though Shmini Atzeres is a different Yontiv, when it comes to the second days of Pesach, we don't make a Shechianu on the second days of Pesach. We already made a Shechianu on Passover, it's done. But when it comes to Shmini Atzeres, that's a new din d'oraisa. It just happens to be right up against Pesach. But at the end of the day, the chiyuv is a totally different chiyuv. So it's a little strange. If I have an obligation to bring a korban for Pesach, why can I do tashlumin for that on Shmini Atzeres? That's not the same holiday, bichlal. But what does the Mishnah say? The Mishnah says, Chogeg es kol haregel v'yom tov ha'acharon shel chag. Very strange. So we have to see how this works. Avar haregel v'lo chag. What if the whole holiday passes over and you didn't bring the korban chagigah? Eino chai b'achar, so you're done. You cannot fulfill the mitzvah anymore. Al zene emar. And when you make this kind of mistake, the pasuk reads, Me'uvas lo yachol liskon v'chesron lo yuchal lehimanos. Your mistake cannot be corrected. That which you are lacking cannot be recounted. So says the Gemara. Says the Mishnah. I don't know if that's really pshat in the pasuk, that this is an irreversible change. Why? Because says Reb Shimon ben Menasya Omer. He says, Ezim me'uvas she'eno yachol. What is it? What's an error that you can't fix? Says the Gemara, that's when you bring a mamzer into the world. That's the kind of things that we view as an intractable error. Okay, you forgot a korban. I'm not saying it's great. It's avar zmano batla korbano, but it really doesn't compare to the lingering effects of bringing a mamzer into the world. It's not so simple. Im tomar begonev v'gozel. If you want to talk about someone who did geneva, someone who did gzela, yachal hulach zero v'taken. A person can return that, and then all will be fine. Reb Shimon ben Yochai Omer ein korem me'uvas el mishay mesukan betchila benisavas. So this is already beautiful. You can't be off the derech unless you've been on the derech. You can't say that someone did something so bad that they're me'uvas el mishay mesukan betchila. You first have to be straight before you can be crooked. And therefore that person is Vinis Aves, and then he became crooked. The Eze, who is a person who is first straight and then crooked, is a Talmud Chacham, a Porish Min Torah, Rachman al-Islan, a person's a Ben Torah, and they turn from the path. So that is an example of Me'uvas, Lo Yachol Liskon, and that's the big difference between the Reisha and the Seif of the Mishnah, is that in the Reisha of the Mishnah, we view this intractable error as simply missing an opportunity for your korban. It's not even a lav. It's not even a lav. We learned about this in Maseches Yuma, that when it comes to an Isser Aseh, when you are a Mevatel and Mitzvah Aseh, you tell the Kadosh Baruch Hu you're sorry and you move on. With other Averos, you have to be more contrite. You have to be much more aware of the mistakes that you're making. Says the Mishnah, Minahani Mili. How do we know that this is true? How do we know that what is true? 10 lines down in the Rashis at the opening of the Gemara. Dibur Hamaskal Minahani Mili. Minahani Mili di Yom Tov Ha'achron Shel Chag HaSukkos Tashlum and the Korbanos HaChag Liyichidim. How do we know that this korban applies on the last day of Sukkot, which really is not the same holiday? So says the Gemara, third of the way down on Testament Aleph, Amar Rav Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Shmuel, Ne'emar Atzeres B'Shvis. It has the word Atzeres B'Shvis Shel Pesach. V'ne'emar Atzeres B'Shvini Shel Chag. We have the word in 2 places, one by Pesach and one by Sukkot. Just like by Pesach, we have Tashlumin on the last day of the holiday. So too Afkan L'Tashlumin, so too by the last day of Pesach, which of Sukkot, which is really Shmini Atzeres. We therefore have the leniency, as it were, to still allow the korban to be brought. All right, put on your thinking caps just for a moment. We know there are 2 types of Gzeira Shava. A Gzeira Shava, where the words are perfectly left alone. There's no other usage of the words, Atzeres over here and Atzeres over there. Where each of those words are available without other drushes being used on them, that Gzeira Shava is referred to as a Gzeira Shava Mufne, where the words are officially available for use. That means that those words of Atzeres have no other drushes. A Gzeira Shava She'eno Mufne is a Gzeira Shava where really the word Atzeres over here and or over there are already used for another drasha. We can still build a Gzeira Shava, but a Gzeira Shava She'ena Mufne is not as strong as a Gzeira Shava Mufne. And this is a Gzeira Shava Mufne. This is what the Gemara says almost halfway down. Mufne. This Gzeira Shava that we just made of Atzeres, to teach us that a korban of a tashlumin can still be brought on Shmini Atzeres, we know that this is a really good argument because mufne, because the words Atzeres that are used for the Gzeira Shava, those words are not used for anything else. De'ilav mufne. Had it been that this Gzeira Shava was not mufne, had it been that this Gzeira Shava, the words of Atzeres, which are used to build the bridge from Pesach to a Shmini Atzeres, had it been that those words had another purpose, were used for another drasha, then ika lemifrach, I could have said there's a big difference. I could have asked a sharp question, a pirchas, a strong question. I could have asked the following and rejected the whole thing. The seventh day of Pesach is all part and parcel of all of the Chag. However, Tomar b'Shmini shel Chag shechaluk mishalafana, but Shmini Atzeres is a different Chag altogether. I have an awesome logical argument why Pesach and why Shmini Atzeres are not the same. I could have argued that by Pesach, because all of the days are one bundle of holidays, therefore there's Tashlum, but by Shmini Atzeres and Sukkot are different holidays, we should say no. Says the Gemara, you can't even argue that. Why? Because this Gzeira Shava is mufne. That's what it means, that the words are all available. Atzeres and Atzeres, the one by Shmini Atzeres and the one by Pesach are unused other than for this purpose. Therefore, says the Gemara, lie, it is in fact the case, afnuye mufne. And therefore these words are available, and therefore this drasha is unshakable, and therefore, halacha l'maisa, please God, very soon, that if one needs to bring a tashlumin, a korban for tashlumin, they can do so even on Shmini Atzeres as it relates to Sukkot. Even though they're different holidays, it's not logical, doesn't need to be. We have a Gzeira Shava, Atzeres, and it's a Gzeira Shava mufne, where each of the words is perfectly available for the sake of this Gzeira Shava. And the Gemara says, Michti, let's analyze this a little bit. My Atzeres, how do we know in fact that it's mufne? Because what does the word Atzeres mean? Atzeres, Atzor, stop. Atzor be'asiyas malacha. That's what the word means, right? Well, we don't need that. Why not? Because haksiv lo saseh malacha. We already know from other psukim that we're not allowed to do malacha. So the word atzeres is teaching me not to do malacha. We already know that. Therefore, atzeres the kasav rachman alam ali. Therefore, why does the Torah go out of its way to say the word atzeres? It's extra. Elalav, elashmamina leafnuye. Therefore, the Torah does not need the word atzeres other than for the sake of this gzeira shava. In other words, this gzeira shava is only using these words of atzeres for its own purpose of the gzeira shava, with no other extractions at all, no other inferences, no other drushas, and therefore it is a perfect gzeira shava. So this was all answer number one of how do we know that we are allowed to bring tashlumin on Shmini Atzeres for a korban of Sukkot, even though it's not logical. We answered Atzeres. The Gemara now presents a second answer, a little bit more than halfway down. The Tana Maisi Lamihacha. We actually have a brisa that discusses this halacha as well, as to how we know that a korban for Sukkot can be brought b'tashlumin on Shmini Atzeres, even though it's a different holiday. What's the drasha? It's a brisa, 2/3 of the way down. The Tanya, B'chagosemo so chag la Hashem shivas yamim, that you can celebrate this chag to Hashem 7 days. Yachol yehei chogeg v'holech kol shiva. Maybe you could argue that you can bring your initial korban chagigah all 7 days. Talmud lomar oso. What does the word oso teach me? Oso atachogeg, speaking about the first day. On the first day you bring your chagigah. V'i atachogeg kol shiva. You can't just bring it for the first time whenever you want. The first korban chagigah has to be brought on day 1. In Cain, says the Gemara, Lama nemar shiva. Why then does the Gemara say shiva? I know that it has to start on day 1. Says the Gemara, letashlumin. It comes to tell me that all of the days of Sukkot, I have an obligation to bring a tashlumin if I miss the opportunity. Uminayin sheim lo chag yom tov harishon shel chag shechogeg v'holech es kol haregel v'yom tov ha'acharon. How then do I know that I'm allowed to bring this korban all the way out to yom tov acharon? Talmud lomar b'chodesh hashvi'i tachog v'oso. Another pasuk that in the 7th month I should celebrate with this. If it's the 7th month, maybe I would argue I can bring this korban chagigah for the duration of the month of Tishrei. Talmud lomar oso atachogeg v'atachogeg chutzala. You're only on that during that holiday are you allowed to bring the korban, but you're not allowed to bring this outside of the holiday. Umay tashlumin. What is the din of tashlumin? How does the din of tashlumin work? We've actually learned this before. Is it in this Masechta? Oh, that's so sad. Yep, it was 7 blot ago. Man, that's not good. Yep, exactly right. So it says the Gemara, my tashlumin. How does tashlumin work? Tashlumin works only under specific circumstances, according to some of the Amoraim. Rav Yochanan amar tashlumin l'rishon. The only way you can bring a tashlumin, a replacement korban on days 2 until the end of the Chag, is if you were in fact involved in day 1. It all has to be a replacement for day 1. And Rav Oshia Amar Tashlumin Zelazeh, every day can be a replacement. My Beinayu, what's the difference between them? The difference is the following case scenario. Amar Bzeira Chiger b'Yom Tov Rishon v'Nispashet b'Yom Tov Sheni Ika Beinayu. The difference is a person who is incapable of bringing the korban on day 1 and he's healed by day 2. So why does that make a difference? Rabbi Yochanan Amar Tashlum Derishon. Everything has to be focused on day one. Kevan de lo chazi b'rishon. Since he wasn't medically fit to do anything on day one, he therefore didn't bring a korban. Therefore, lo chazi b'sheni. There's no din of tashlumin by him because it's all dependent on day one. You miss day one, you're done. However, Rav Oshi Amar Tashlumin zelazeh. That really any day can be a tashlumin day, and therefore alfagav de lo chazi b'rishon chazi b'sheni. And even if a person didn't do the korban on day one, but even though he wasn't fit on day one, but it doesn't make a difference, chazi b'sheni, and because he's chazi b'sheni, therefore he can bring the korban on day two. We'll stop right here. On Shabbos, we'll pick up at it. Umi Amar Rav Yochanan on the bottom of Testament Aleph. Wishing you all a beautiful night.
Yeah.